Have you ever heard of the term draining the swamp? If not, you'll want to tune in to understand what the heck this term actually means and how it impacts team effectiveness and your ability to effectively connect with others, whether you are a leader trying to connect with your team or you are on a project team trying to connect with your peers so that you guys can ultimately work more effectively together. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Israel Beck, CEO of Cratic, a technology company based in Calgary that focuses on helping teams build an amazing culture quickly and measurably. Israel has extensive experience as a strategy consultant with a focus on business transformation and mergers and acquisitions. With his passion for leveraging technology to bring out the best ideas from teams, rather than simply amplifying the loudest voice in the room, I'm excited to have him share his insights with you. Well, welcome, Israel. Can you share with us a story, whether it's like, man, like this made my career or this was about to break it, but it helped me kind of springboard to where I am today, type of story for, again, how it has shaped the trajectory of your career?
Thanks, Angela. It's so nice to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I have a lot of those kinds of moments that have like really changed my career. I think one of the ones that really happened for me here, the reason I'm doing the cultural work I'm doing is that in my last job, I worked as a consultant and I worked on a lot of different teams. And I started noticing that certain teams I loved being a part of. I would have these incredible bonding conversations with the leaders, with the team members, with the clients. And then there were other teams that I just did not have that experience. I've had teams where like a manager would get mad at me for talking to a client about like, trivial stuff because I'm like trying to build relationships and get to know them. And they'd be like, why are you talking about their sports car? And I'm like, well, they care about their sports car. I want to talk about it because they care about it. So I started noticing that different teams were different like that. And I started believing that which kind of end of the spectrum you were on had a lot of influence on the results of whatever you were doing. Because I worked on a lot of different teams that did different types of things. And, you could just see that the ones where people were intentionally kind of focusing on creating that open space, the connection points for each other's brain spaces to like put things together and like think through things. They were having a completely different experience as a team, as opposed to the ones where it was like, someone cracking whip and just being like, get this thing done. And what I started noticing is that the deliverables completely changed too, because what would happen is there's a couple models here. But one is like, hey, we decided 2 months ago what we were going to deliver. Now we just got to do it, get it done. Whereas the other ones had more of an organic attitude. Like we decided on the vision and the direction 2 months ago, but we've discovered all this new information since then. We've had a client conversation that revealed something to us, or we had an idea that changed things for us. And so, yeah, long way of answering your question, but that experience led up to one project that I had where I was running the project, and I basically decided that I was going to lean into this philosophy as much as I could and make it kind of like the core philosophy behind how I did everything with the team. And I am still close friends with everyone in that team. It's been like 8 years. But it's amazing, like the kinds of stories, the experiences that happened. And there's like great success stories. Like we had a project that was supposed to be like a $250,000 project, and we ended up selling a $4 million add-on to the client. And it was all due to this philosophy of like, let's just really try to get on the same page with each other. And so when that happened, like I knew something cool was going on in the team and the experience, but then all of a sudden I had like this huge number over the top of it to be like, look, this like really works. Like we've spent so much time and energy trying to unlock each other's best ideas. And, now we have something to show for it.
Incredible. Before I dive into that team chemistry and how it impacts the bottom line piece, I want to kind of go into that leadership component where, based on your extensive consulting experience, like what would you say is like one of the biggest challenges that leaders face when it comes to team effectiveness and holding space for this?
Well, there's several really big challenges, and I'll just list the ones that come to mind and the priority that they do. One of the hardest is managing up. So in order for you to create this environment for your team inevitably someone above you is putting pressure on you and being like, hey, I need this we said 2 months ago. It's like, I use that voice, but I think you all know, I think you know what I mean. It's like there's somebody who's like putting that pressure on you. And so you have to be a leader who's comfortable kind of standing there with the pressure, being like, okay, well, my team and I have worked on this for a while, and now we've decided we need to go a slightly different direction. And here's the reason. And so that's the number one thing, is you're creating a bubble. And it's sort of like you can help everybody within your bubble, but then who's going to help you becomes a problem. So that's where you do need to be able to get to results to show, we know what we're doing. I was in an organization where I had a lot of, I think, trust. My leader trusted me a lot because I had a lot of credibility in what I'd been doing. And then when we won this big build on, and we ended up with getting 3 of those, one really large one and then a couple smaller ones. So it's like started to make momentum for us. The second thing that I found that's really hard is sometimes you're, given a team of people that you don't get to choose the team. That's very common. And so when you don't get to choose the team, you have to kind of figure out how to work with the people that you have. And so you might not be able to find, the exact people that you want to work with all the time. And that is incredibly challenging, like as a leader, trying to create space and protect those types of people when maybe you don't even necessarily want them on your team. But a sad reality is like you have to figure out a way to work with those people. Those are really big challenges that I guess those are the biggest ones I've uncovered. And then the third one, I guess, is yourself. And this is coming back directly to the point of your podcast, is like, can you hold the space for yourself? Can you take care of yourself enough that you can show up and bring the space for those people? Because people do take space. They take mental space, they take emotional space, they take physical space, obviously, but they take emotional space. And so, like, can you show up, and when you see a team member struggling, do you have enough in your tank to take them aside and say, hey, tell me for 30 minutes, like, what's going on? And just, let me absorb some of it for you.
Powerful. And I had to sit with that one for the moment, especially that last part when you said creating space, right? Because when we are constantly inundated, whether it's from up top, laterally, through social media, whatever it may be, right? There's always stimulus. When someone actually creates that pause for us, I think it has such a powerful effect that people underestimate how that impacts your ability to be more effective, right? And for yourself, you built a company from scratch. And so you get to choose the team that you surround yourself with. So what's top of mind for you as you build the team around you, and how are you keeping them on track when you're trying to scale and build as quickly and as sustainably as you can, right?
I think I'm a lot more focused on the sustainable part than the quick part, which people will tell you is true when they get to know me. But I'll answer by going back to what you were saying about the space. So one of the things you have to do, so we acknowledge that there's like, there's upper pressure, there's lower pressure, and then there's your personal pressure. One of the things you have to do is you have to put it in your calendars. The calendar is a powerful weapon. And I used to believe that when I was a consultant. If you put a meeting in, people show up to the meeting. And so I now use my calendar for all kinds of selfish purposes. To block out time for myself, to block out time for other individuals, to block out time for conversations. It's such a simple tool. It's like, so there's a strategy behind this. And I have a kind of a 2-part strategy. So one of them is that I set up a weekly meeting that is just about reconnecting with the group. It's a short meeting, 30 minutes. That's all it should be. It should be early in the week though. And you can kind of go around and do a stand-up, traditional stand-up where it's like, hey, what's everybody working on this week? Or you can make it less traditional, like, hey, what are we focused on right now? What is individually going on? And it's just a quick roundtable where everybody just sort of puts some words into the room and sees what happens. You're not exactly trying to get much done except the connection part. And that was extremely important during COVID. And I think as teams are remote, it's more important than ever. But for any team, sit down for 30 minutes, put it in the calendar. Then you as a leader have to show up. You have to show up, be available, be present. You don't have to necessarily be in a great mood, but you can't be in a bad mood. Like you can't show up and be mean to people. Yeah, so I'd say that's the biggest thing, is creating that structure. In terms of what I prioritize about my business, it's interesting. something I didn't expect when I started this business was that businesses seem to have a mind of their own. I actually now kind of fully think of them as their own entity. They're an evolutionary product of the planet. So they have their own sort of nature about them. And so my business requires me to find certain experts and expertise at different times. And then I desperately need them for a period of time. And then I need them periodically going forward. So I think that the hardest part is actually just being attentive to the personality of the business and what it's asking for and needing at that point.
Okay, I'm going to click into the connection piece that you mentioned because I think that one of the things that a lot of founders have been struggling with post-COVID is how do you enhance that connection virtually without booking in like 15,000 Zoom meetings because then people become Zoom fatigue, etc. So I'm curious for you, like, do you do like team building activities or how do you do that without having the water cooler talk slash again that energy piece is huge, right? When we talk about connection. So anyways, I'm gonna throw it back to you as to like how do you foster that connectedness within your team aside from that one meeting at the beginning of the week as an example?
Yeah. I'm glad you're double clicking on this because I forgot to mention the other piece of this strategy, which is my one-on-ones with them. Now, you just said there's Zoom fatigue. We want to avoid that. I completely agree. That's again, I think, listening to your business and like, how much do you need right now versus when can you kind of take a break? And I'll tell you, a real life example that's happening with my team. So I believe in a philosophy. I call it draining the swamp. I don't know where I came up with that term, but somehow it just clicked. It started when I was in consulting like 10 years ago, where I would set time aside with an individual. I would tell them I would like to spend time every week talking to you and trying to understand who you are and how you think. Are you okay with that? If they're on my team, they don't really have a choice. They're like, sure. uh, if they're a superior or they're a peer, then they're usually like, yeah, that sounds fine. Like, why not? And so I'll say, can I just book like 3 or 4 of these meetings in the calendar? And I would like to set the time aside to just try to understand how you think. And they go, yeah, why not? So I guess there's 3 steps here. So I get their permission, I set the time on the calendar, and then I show up and I listen as deeply as I can. I ask every question I can think of that they will allow me to ask. Sometimes I try to get it personal. I am like, how does your family feel about your job? How do your parents feel? Are they supportive? Are they proud of you? I try to tap into those like pieces of who they are that's kind of behind the meeting. So that I'll do that at the same time with the same individual every week for 5 weeks for an hour. And I call it draining the swamp because what I found is that eventually you do get to a place where they do not have much else to say and you cannot think of any more questions. It's sort of like you're done with that step. Now I've refreshed it and it's like come back 6 months later or a year later and be like, hey, let's start doing those one-on-ones again. We should do that again. But what I found is you're able to create like this really deep, I think is neurological. Like I think we're doing it through the words that we're exchanging, we're processing each other's ideas. I ask them questions. I repeat it back to them. You said this. What did you mean by that? Can you say more about this? And my intention is truly to understand them. It's not to change anything or fix anything. There's none of that going on. None of that going on. 100%. Like, can I just understand how you interpret things? And what I found is that once you do that and you commit that process, you can set that aside and then maintaining it is very, very, very easy. You just sit down with the person for coffee and say, hey, tell me what's going on with stuff. You're already on the same page so well. You've gotten to this deep level of a connection. As long as you don't do anything to damage that trust that you've built and that vulnerability that you've created, you can never use the things that they say against them. You can never, ever do that. You can never do that. That has to be a principle of how you approach this. It's like you can't take something they said in this meeting and bring it up in a team meeting, ever. But I think most leaders would probably know that naturally. I just feel like you have to say it because it's so key. You've built that trust. Once you have it, maintaining it's not that hard because you understand how this person thinks. So when they say something, you're going to understand how to respond. You're going to understand. And I think that happens pretty subconsciously, actually. I don't have like a database of all the information they've said. I guess I technically do. I just can't access it like a database on my computer. But Yeah, if you get to that level, it's kind of a subconscious connection, and then I think it creates its own efficiency.
Okay, you just shared something on there that I really value is as you get to deeply know the individual, you're trying to communicate and work with them in a way that you know resonates with them because you truly understand who they are. And I think that can be done both ways, right? As an individual contributor, as you get to know your leader, I think there's so much value in doing the same. And I mean, common sense is a huge part of this, right? Like you can engage when someone's getting annoyed with the questions and kind of read the room in the process, which is actually the hardest part of this entire process, right? Is understanding how the boundaries lie with the other individual. But once you get there, it's again communicating according to what resonates with them and what matters to them in moments that matter versus being like, well, my default is this way. Therefore, I'm going to just continue it as is. Right. So thank you for sharing that connection piece and tying that into your product at Cratic. Can you tell us a little bit about what Cratic does and how it kind of incorporates the stories that you've already shared with us in terms of what you've noticed through your consulting work?
Yeah, so it basically takes the philosophy that I'm talking about and puts it into a product. So while I was having this experience, I was like, I wasn't even sure what we were doing. I was just, so there's another piece of this I haven't mentioned, something that we also invented called brain spacing. And brain spacing is this idea that you could block of a room, invite whoever you want to this meeting, and it's an open form brain dump meeting, but it's hosted by one person, and that one person has an agenda item. They own the agenda, but they are not allowed to do anything besides create the context. They can say, here's what's going on, and here's what I need to get done. And then it's all about asking questions. You ask people to come and you literally just say, what do you think about this? 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 And it turns into this really weird conversation where you're just literally trying to get every single idea. You're just obsessed with like, what's another idea I have not heard yet? So a very simple example would be like, you're giving, an executive briefing to like a leadership team about your project. That could be a perfect time for a brain space. So we sit down and say, hey, we have to do this briefing. It's in 2 weeks. I think it's got to be 4 or 5 pages. We're going to have 15 minutes. These are the key individuals that are going to be there. What should we talk about? I could do it as a leader, and my team members could do it. They could host one for their area and say, I need to do this. I want people to come and talk and explain things to me. Okay, so that also really works because what happens is you get to these like profound ideas where the whole group of people goes, whoa, like that's what we should be talking about. Yes, and that's how we should say it. And not only is the idea really good, but you have this coalescence of everyone else believing it and being supportive of it. So that person goes out into the world knowing that they've got their team at their back. Okay, so that's kind of the last piece I'll mention besides the weekly meetings, draining the swamp, and brain spacing. So those ideas, I really thought, like, what if you could productize this? And so that's what I set out to do. I think that's what we have now. So it's a product that analyzes people's language. It does it in a very cool, like kind of futuristic way, but it basically replicates what I think a person would do, which is you listen to what people say, you think about what they're saying, you analyze it, you ask follow-up questions, and do it in such a way that it creates that space so that people are thinking about their answers. Because as people think about their answers, their brain actually evolves. It's like we create new tissue as and of course, according to the principle of neuroplasticity, like we're actually evolving our brains as things are happening. And so that's what the product does. It's built with all these questions in it. It analyzes the language. We put people into teams of 8 to 12 people. They get asked the question separately. They answer it privately first. As they answer, they get language insights about how their communication patterns and styles sound. So that's the reflection back. And then as soon as they answer, they're given access to other people's answers. And that's kind of a key principle. Is they can't see, I actually like this better than doing it the analog form. They have to answer it before they can see other people's answers. And that creates this weird feeling of vulnerability, especially if they're weird questions, which we have some very interesting questions. They're all very positive psychology. That's the other thing. Like, I don't believe in saying like, what's wrong around here? What are we doing wrong? Like I just philosophically, I don't go that direction. I'm more of like, what are the things that are really working? What are the areas where we really want to double down? What do we like doing? That's a great question. Like, what do we actually like about this? Because if we like it, someone else will like it, and we'll move in the right direction. So positive psychology questions, but they ask people these questions, they answer them. The other cool thing is they get to vote anonymously on each other's answers. They also can't see which ones are getting voted on, so they have to vote blindly. It's a blind vote, which again creates more personal accountability. You don't know what the popular thing is. Once you vote, then you can suddenly see it, and it draws your attention. Like, oh, I didn't even read this person's comment that well, but it got all the votes. Oh, I read it. Oh, I didn't even realize they were saying, so it's like we want people to have these like aha moments, because that's basically what's happening in a great environment, is people having lots of aha moments, and you're getting just good at creating those. The other thing that it does is it requires a little cadence. So we set it up, if the team already has a weekly meeting, we just attach it onto their weekly meeting. If they do not have one, then we institute one and say, okay, you need to start having a weekly meeting just while you're doing the program. And again, we also truncated it. So it's like I mentioned, the 5 weeks. We typically do 6 weeks and then take breaks, and then do 6 weeks and then take breaks, do 6 weeks. And we find that really gets people to a new paradigm, because they go through these conversations, they have tons of aha moments. The other cool thing that I guess that I'm excited about this is it's incredibly scalable. Like, a great leader is only so scalable. Like, the best leaders I know that are running like 1,000-person organization are just like doing 80 one-to-ones a week, and they're just like, I can't stay on top of it. That's a common problem. Like, you have incredible leaders who are just skyrocketing up the ladder, and so many people like them and trust them and follow them. That's amazing. But even for those leaders, I want to give them a tool to scale themselves, to try to create that experience for other people, even when they're not in the room. And then also just make the framework really easily available to literally any leader. So we run it with teams of just 8 people, and we run it with teams much, much larger than that. So.
Okay, I wanted to tune into the part where, when is this applicable for a business, right? Because, like, sometimes when it comes to a product or service, you come in when everything is about to break, and you're like, okay, we got to get this team together, or else we're kind of screwed, right? Bottom line wise, we're not effective. Or is it one of those moments where it's more so, what, like, we're finally able to breathe as a team? How about we leverage this opportunity to see how we can then bring those ideas out again and bring that connection out again?
It's a great question. Okay. So there's a pragmatic business infrastructure that has to be in place. You have to have processes. You have to have some customers. You have to have things working. You have to have a P&L. You have to have employees. Once those things are in place, I think of what I'm doing as margin optimization. But there has to be margin to begin with. So like, if a business is really on the table, like dying, really struggling, that's usually not when you want to focus on culture. That's when you need to reorg, cut stuff, restructure. You need to do something different. Where culture starts to become really important is at the point where the pieces are starting to fall into place. And it's like, okay, we know how to sell, we know how to deliver, we know how to cover our books, we know how to pay employees, pieces are all in place, the business is starting to work, and things are going good. But we want things to be better. We want them to be more efficient. We want decisions to happen faster and better. We don't want turnover as much. Like, we went to a bunch of people, we burned some people to get here. Like, now we want to be established. We want the business to grow up and mature. And that, I'd say, is not just, the way I'm talking about it there is really thinking about an early stage business as it's going through the maturity cycle. I also think later stage businesses where, again, everything's established and it's almost like too structured. That is another place where this really, really shines, is where people have the ability to break out of some of the kind of boring stuff that's going on and actually try to turn their minds on and think about, like, how do I want my career to go here? Like, what, because part of what we're trying to do when you unlock culture, part of what happens is that people become emotionally invested in each other in the work. There are leaders who don't want that. Like, they don't want their employees to show up like passionate. I always really wanted my employees to show up passionate, like, or my team. I wanted them to show up with a level of commitment about like, hey, this is good for me. I want this to go well because that's good for me. And if I do well, then this does well, and this does well, then I do well. And they think about it in that way. And then they start thinking about their team members in that way, where it's not combative, but it's 100% like, hey, if you do well and things go good, then I'm going to benefit. And that means I need to make sure I'm doing good. because I know that's going to benefit you, and get into that mentality. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I actually kind of think every business needs some of this. This is always a valuable thing. There are times when I would not recommend it because I would say you probably have other business issues that should be a priority. But what I believe is that every leader and organization eventually needs to start trying to address this problem of how do we become a mature business? How do we operate from a place of confidence that we really know each other? We really are on the same page. And that's sort of like growing up for all of us. It's like we physically grow up, but there comes a time when you have to decide, like, am I going to be an adult about this, about life, and about my responsibilities? I see it the very same way. You have to find the time when it's right for you, and the real value, like I said, is margin. It comes back to the margin of the business, because you can optimize those contracts. When I told you we sold that $4 million project, I didn't mention that I ended up only having to put 3 resources on it because we scoped it so well. Our relationship was so good. And what that meant was we had the biggest margin of any project in North America at the time. Like, the margin was enormous. The project was huge. The client was happy. It's like the business would be fine doing crappy projects all the time. Like, you can do that technically. But by implementing this philosophy and trying to build this deeper meaning about what we were doing, we were able to unlock enormous value sitting right there in the business.
What a cool way. Oh my gosh, what a cool way of unlocking value. I'm sure your client was very happy that it only took 3 resources to make that magic happen. And I was going to say, even going back to earlier, what you said about that blind voting piece, I love that because when I think back to the amount of times I've voted on something or completed a survey, sometimes when I'm like, I just have so much going on, I vote according to what's popular, right? Like, I will openly admit that. And it's just because it's the easiest, right? But it doesn't mean that it's actually the best solution for that moment. So as we slowly wrap up our conversation, one of my questions to you is when it comes to unleashing the potential of individuals and organizations, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Listening to them. Yeah, listening, and listening more. I think a lot of people need to be listened to. And I think Angela, like, of all people, like, you are so good at listening. Every time we talk, I am like being out listened by you. Love to listen. I like to ask questions. Getting really good at asking questions is one of the most valuable skills, I think, in the world. When it comes to unlocking an individual's potential, they need to be heard. They need to have a sounding board. They need to have somebody who's comfortable saying, I don't understand that. I will say that, like, there's this culture side where all I do is listen. There's another side that moves into coaching where it's like, okay, that doesn't really make sense to me. Can you change some of that? Or, there's like what I also call like directing and correcting. When you're a boss, you spend a lot of time directing and correcting. It's like, hey, go do that. Don't do that. Change that, fix that. And then there's the listening piece where you build the culture, you build the relationship, you build that positive relationship. And then you have to go back to saying, here's how to do things. But I think the piece that's always missing, that I see always missing, I used to say, the last time my boss asked me a question was when he was interviewing me. Like, imagine that. Imagine, like, and then contrast that with a company where you have a boss who wants to sit with you for an hour and just listen and try to understand who you are. Different worlds. So yeah, listening.
Well, thank you for your insights and just sharing that comment. It means a lot to me because I think your ability to do that well in terms of listening, asking great questions, and unpacking feeds into my curiosity as well. So I love that chemistry there. And last question to you is, what is one thing that you're working on that you're super excited?
Oh, thanks. I'm working on partnerships. So we have now rolled this software out. It's a SaaS product. We just relaunched the enterprise version. So we are building partnerships with M&A consultants and HR leaders and finding applications for it. I'm excited about seeing teams blossom through the power of this, kind of introspective dialogues. I guess it's kind of bringing it back to the business, but that's what I'm excited about.
That's important, especially since it's your baby, right? So, Israel, thank you again for sharing your story and your insights. And to everyone else that's tuned into another episode, thank you so much for your time and attention. It means a lot to me, and I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.